James, and I'd like to welcome you to part 3 of my video series where I'm sharing about my personal study and practice of Cartomancy with playing cards. In the previous installment, I started going over my meanings for the cards, starting with all the aces as a whole. So I talked about what the ace means to me, what the number 1 means to me because they are associated with one another, and then I shared the meanings for each of the 4 cards. We're going to be picking up right where we left off in this video, and I'm going to be talking about the 2s. So in the next segment, I'll be talking about my associations for the number 2, and then we'll move on and we'll talk about each of the cards, and I'll be sharing my meanings. The deck that has been assisting me throughout this video series is the Tally-Ho playing cards. It's number 13 in the series, and what I like about this one is that it was designed by Jackson Robinson of King's Wild Project. Now that I've talked about the deck, let's now move into the next segment where we're looking at my associations for the number 2. And here we are with all the 2 cards in the deck. And for me, the theme that I first go to, or my first association with the number 2, is relationship and partnerships. And along those lines, I also think of connection. Just like I talked about with the aces and the number 1 in the previous video, when I think of the 2 symbolically, it represents a straight line, which is a connection. Some other associations that I have for the 2, when it turns up, is exchange, some kind of transfer, or sharing. Now, keeping with the relationship and partnership context of the number 2, I also think about compatibility and cooperation, as well as help, support, and assistance. In the previous video, I talked about the number 1 representing the leader or the director. The number 2 is more of a behind the scenes type of person and likes to be considered the helpmate. So that is where I get those associations for the number 2. Now, some of my other associations for the 2 are polarity and duality, and along with that, opposites and contrast. Keeping with the relationship aspect of 2, some other associations that come to mind is a duo or a duet, a couple, or a pair. And then because I like to share some pop culture associations for the number 2, I have things like it takes 2, 2 to make it right, 2's company, 2 of a kind. You know the expression, there's 2 sides to every story, or a two-way street, or someone who's two-faced, or two-timing. And here's another one, it takes 2 to tango. And then some of my other associations are twins and double or seeing double. And then the expression 2 peas in a pod. So those are all my associations for the number 2. And just as I encouraged you with the aces, when it comes to the number 2, what associations do you think of? What immediately comes to mind? Because those could be associations that you put into the 2 cards in terms of creating meaning. And so since I talked about creating meaning, let's now start looking at all the cards individually, and I'll be explaining some of my meanings for each of them. And here we are with the first of our 2 cards, the 2 of hearts. This is the card in the deck that you want to look for when you're asking about relationships and partnerships. That's my first immediate go-to with the 2 of hearts. Relationships and partnerships. And playing along with some of my associations for the suit of hearts. Remember now, I talked about the suit of hearts representing feelings, emotions, relationships, and healing. Here, this is a card that can talk about an emotional connection, because if all the 2 cards talk about relationships, each one will be a different facet or a different type of relationship. And so with this one, I tend to think there's an emotional connection between the parties involved. This is known as the love card. Some other associations that I have for the 2 of hearts is I tend to think of a child or children in general when this card comes up. This is also a card that can refer to pets, and especially those pets that people consider to be like children. So playing along the lines of a child or children in general, the Two of Hearts for me is a pregnancy card. So it can represent being pregnant, and then playing on that even further, having a sense of expectancy, because sometimes people who are pregnant talk about it in terms of that they are expecting. And so with that, the Two of Hearts can represent expectations. So this could be expectations in a relationship, expectations with a child or children, those kinds of things. But for me, the Two of Hearts can represent some kind of expectation. Now, keeping with the relational aspect of the Two of Hearts, this is a card for me that can represent sharing feelings and emotions. And I come to give it an expression. And so the expression I always have with this card is, I feel the same way. Another aspect of the Two of Hearts, keeping with the context of relationships, this card can signal healing in a relationship. And with that, the idea that it takes two people to heal a relationship. And then some other aspects of the Two of Hearts as I wrap this up are things like artwork, hobbies, and talent. And so those are my associations for the Two of Hearts. And now let's move on to the next two. Next up, we have the Two of Clubs. And so if you'll remember, my associations for the suit of clubs are work and business, being social, and making progress. So with those associations in mind, some of the meanings that I have for this card is that it can represent a working relationship or a business partnership. That's my first immediate association with this card, a working relationship or a business partnership. Given that clubs can represent being social, this card can also represent a friendship. Some of the other meanings that I have for this card is it can represent a helping hand, going with the idea that the two can represent assistance. This card can also represent some kind of gift, and that could be a gift that's being given or received based on where it is in the reading. And along those same lines, the Two of Clubs can also represent a benefit that is either given or received. Now, keeping with the work and business context of the suit of clubs, this card can represent a service or a service-based business. And still keeping with the business context for me personally, this card can represent a business meeting, an appointment, or a session, especially if you have a service-based business like I do. Now, keeping with the social aspect of the suit of clubs, this card can mean that there is a social invitation being extended. So, social invitation. And then the last thing that I want to say about the Two of Clubs is that it can represent time. And so along those lines, it can represent a watch or a clock. And those are my associations for the Two of Clubs. And so now let's move on to the next two, and that is the Two of Diamonds. And here we are with our third two in this video, and that is the Two of Diamonds. So now you'll remember that for me, the suit of diamonds can represent material resources or concerns, and I normally think of money as my immediate go-to with that. And it can also represent energy and success. So that's how I look at the suit of diamonds. So along those lines, some of the meanings that I have for the Two of Diamonds is that it can represent financial help, and again, that's either given or received based on where the card is in the layout. It can also represent a payment made or received. It can represent a small sum of money. And then the last thing, keeping with the money or financial aspect of this card, it can also represent a financial exchange. Now, some other meanings that I have for the card are eating. And for me, one of my most common associations with that is that it can represent going out to lunch or dinner. And so keeping with the food aspect of the card, it can represent cooking. And if the Ace of Hearts, remember in the previous video I talked about the Ace of Hearts representing the home, if the Ace of Hearts shows up in a reading and is the subject of the reading, meaning the home is the subject, then the Two of Diamonds can represent the kitchen in a home. And playing on the energy aspect of the suit of diamonds, this card can represent some kind of energy exchange. Now, keeping with the relationship and partnership aspect of the number 2, some possibilities with this card is it can represent a financial partnership or a successful partnership. And bringing back the energy aspect of the suit of diamonds, this card can show up when one is putting energy into a relationship. And if you'll remember, I talked about in my introduction, I believe that whenever we put energy into something, it's with the intention that it will be successful in the end. So that would be like putting energy into a relationship because you want the relationship to be successful. And since the number 2 can represent pairs of something, this card for me can represent jewelry, just like the ace of diamonds can represent a diamond ring. For me, I tend to think of things in pairs though with the jewelry with this card. Something like a pair of earrings or a matching set of items, like a necklace and a bracelet kind of thing. And then the last thing that I want to say about the 2 of diamonds is that this card, keeping with the sharing aspect of the number 2, can represent sharing one's resources. So those are my meanings for the 2 of diamonds, and so now let's move on and take a look at the last 2 for this video. And here we are with our final 2 for this video installment, and this is the 2 of spades. So now if you'll remember, when I talked about the suit of spades, my associations and meanings for the suit are problems, difficulties, challenges, obstacles, blocks, and hurdles. Keeping that in mind, some of my meanings for this card is a problem in a relationship or a difficult relationship. The 2 of spades for me can mean a split or a separation, and it could also indicate a conflict or a disagreement. It could show a relationship where there is a lack of cooperation or some kind of misunderstanding. This card can also mean an indecision or a split decision. And the 2 of spades can also represent pressure. And with the idea of pressure, I'm talking about being forced to do something. And along with the split or separation aspect of the card, the 2 of spades can also represent a removal of something, something being removed. Now, playing with some aspects of the number 2, the 2 of spades can represent going to extremes. Remember, one of the things that I talked about with the number 2 for me is that it could represent duality. So one of the things that I keep in mind is like this idea of maybe someone being like day and night, like polar opposites, or going to one extreme to the other. The 2 of spades can also represent a difference of opinion or some sort of conflicting ideas or ideals. And that would only come up when people are sharing ideas. So that's another aspect of the 2 of spades for me, sharing ideas. And then keeping with the problems and the difficulties and the challenge aspect of the spades as a suit, then this card can sometimes represent being willing to agree to disagree. And so those are my meanings for the 2 of spades. And there you have it. We've covered all the 2 cards, and that will bring this video installment of the series to a close. In our next installment, we'll cover all the 3 cards, where I'll talk about what the number 3 means to me, and then I'll share my personal meanings and associations for each of the 3 cards. So as I close, I'm James Himm Mitchell, and I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this installment of our series, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video together. So until then, I hope you have a wonderful day, and take care.